Thank you, Amber. I've already talked a little bit with both Amber and John, and way back with Carrie about the specializations in terms of who is on the committee and why. So I'm going to leave the military questions up to John. If that's okay with everybody. And I'm going to leave some of the Civil War questions up to him as well, if that's okay with him too. Not that I didn't understand it, but I think that his skills with the penknife might make him more suitable for this. I will ask some about Appalachia and a few other things. And I think we did talk a little bit about this in our exchanges. A couple of things, and a few things struck me sort of along the way. And some of the things are not entirely your fault that they've been overlooked. These are problems, I think, with the literature as a whole. And I'm kind of giving you a panorama view of some of the things I asked. But first of all, some of your later veterans, like Sergeant York, might have considered himself an Appalachian per se. Some of his ancestors probably wouldn't have, in terms of how we use that term. Do you think that might influence how some of these people saw their homes, saw their kinship patterns, saw the reasons why they were fighting, and who or what they're fighting for?
I think that part of Appalachia is really a mindset that has continued on. I do agree that within that isolated region, you do have a mindset, and it came from those individuals who crossed those mountains first right after the Revolutionary War. And I think that you had a specific group of people who were going to push inland. They wanted that isolation. If they wanted to be in a closer community with people outside of their family or outside of like-minded thinkers, I think that they would have stayed closer to the East Coast. I think that you had that mindset moving with them early on, and that it simply got more and more focused as you remained within that geographically isolated area, because it wasn't just finances and such that were isolated. I think it was mentally that those individuals were isolated. And so maybe they did not consider themselves Appalachian in that word, but they did consider themselves free thinkers and independent and bootstrap people who were going to keep themselves up no matter what. That's why the subsistence farming was so acceptable to them, I believe.
So how would you, in terms of, you mentioned a comparative study, for example, and I know this is getting into, I think probably some of what John will answer, or ask, but so in, for example, with the Civil War era, I'm sure those people might have considered themselves, or thought of themselves first as Tennesseans, or maybe Southerners, and not really have thought of a term like Appalachia. Do you think that mindset might be useful in, or not useful in making a comparative study with another region, in terms of using this, doing a Civil War era study or a study with a later period?
I don't want to completely disagree with you, but I'm not sure that first and foremost they would consider themselves Tennesseans. I think first and foremost they considered themselves as an individual and their family unit as a unit before Tennessee as the state and before the country as a whole. I think that independent mindset would be difficult to compare with other areas, because I don't believe that outside of that region, it's as typical to have individuals who think of themselves in such an isolated way simply in their thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I just simply meant as opposed to Appalachians, like Tennesseans, because again, I'm not convinced that that term is one that would apply. Not that the Appalachians didn't exist in terms of a mountain chain. Simply, I'm not convinced that term would apply historically speaking.
And I agree with that. I guess what I would consider a more proper description of it would be Appalachian mindset, because I do believe that independent mindset was still present during the Civil War. And I think that is why we see such division within that mountain chain during that time, because the Appalachian independent mindset was already formed. And, sorry, my dog is going insane.
Now, you used the term several times in your presentation and kind of frequently in your extreme isolation. Do you have a particular definition? Because obviously that standard would change over time, from the Civil War to World War I to World War II to now. For example, I'm not sure we could say that Fentress County is extremely isolated in 2018 in the same sense, or if at all, as it would be in 1918.
I don't think that the same type of isolation is still present within that area. And let's use Fentress County as our example. I think that, yes, economically they were more isolated, and so I think that we're talking about Civil War period. They were more isolated economically and physically. Today, you do have more access out, but I believe that they were so isolated in those ways for so long that the mentality of isolation is still present there. And I think that you had actually pointed that out about how Billings had said that isolation was really a choice of some of those individuals there. Yes, they left their small communities whenever they needed to pay the land taxes or something like that, but overall, they really wanted to remain in that isolated area because it was their comfort zone. So I think that in Fentress County today, no, you don't have the economic or the physical barriers, but I still think that you have a heritage of that mental, we are separate mentality present.
When you were doing your research, and again, this is something that I think is overlooked a lot in the literature. When you were doing your research in the secondary sources, what kind of information did you find on the transportation, on the infrastructure networks in the region, especially during the Civil War and leading up into World War I?
Those are very difficult to get information on. Specifically, Cades Cove and Feud actually have some mention of that because Hatfield had a logging industry, which he sold those logs outside of the community. So it was present, but it seems like it wasn't utilized as much during the time period. So that kind of infrastructure that was developed, Cades Cove specifically only had that one road that went through it. And that kind of information is incredibly lacking as to how physical transportation happened between these communities and these counties.
So do you think that might reinforce the willful isolation thesis, or do you think that's just an area where scholars have kind of neglected to consider the fact that maybe there was a railroad close or within a reasonable distance, or there were more roads than we would like to think, or maybe we just don't think about infrastructure that much because we use it every day of our lives? And
I think both. One county that I mentioned in the thesis is Scott County, and it was actually formed around the time of the Civil War because people were dying trying to travel from this section of Fentress County into the county seat for court dates and to get married and things like that, they'd fall in the river because there was no infrastructure present in that county. So that county specifically, there's no infrastructure described, and that's why they formed that county, in order to keep people a little bit more safe. But why there's not discussion of that lack of infrastructure there and the presence of infrastructure within other areas, I do feel like it's just really lacking in the literature. I did go through some maps, a lot of maps of Civil War time period in Tennessee to see railroads and where they went and things like that. I didn't include a whole lot of that in my material, but it was interesting to know that there were roads which connected these people, and there were railroads which connected some of the areas. And I think that you'll actually find that the counties that had the higher percentage of slave owners had a stronger infrastructure in place, because they were producing so much agriculturally. That just lent itself to having a stronger infrastructure in place. And so it's kind of this circular reasoning with that.
Okay. That's about all I had for now anyway. John, I'll turn it over to you if you want to take it over from here.
Okay. I was curious about the railroad. The Virginia and Tennessee Railroad was completed in 1856, and I would be kind of curious to see how the counties that bordered the railroad, or the counties through which that railroad went, how they reacted, if differently than the counties that did not have that bordered that railroad. I'd be curious to see that. If that the existence of a connection, a relatively easy connection to the outside world, it changed the way the counties behaved.
And I believe that it would, given that Scott County was the most isolated of these counties and had such a strong union concept that they actually removed themselves, they thought, from the government as a whole and created, the free and independent state of Scott. So, I mean, they were so staunchly supportive of the Union that they thought that they were leaving the country as a whole, and they were completely isolated. So I think that you're right that would find some connection to these counties which were more Confederate. I would make that assumption without researching any of that at all.
Yeah, the analog, I did some work on Calhoun County, Alabama, in my graduate work. Same thing. At the completion of the railroad just prior to the war, a railroad that connected the mountain county to the south changed the political behavior of the county. So the other thing is that there's a book by a gentleman named Rollins, and if you'll pardon my language, the name of the book is The Damned Red Flags of Rebellion. It talks about how units were recruited. And if you think of the Civil War, you think on both sides of incredible acts of bravery, because for the most part, units were recruited from locales. And if you ran away in a battle where everyone else stood fast and you had to go home after the war, even if you survived, and everyone would know you're the guy that ran away at Chickamauga or whatever, that it enhanced this, kind of the cohesiveness of these units. And in the way that, the Bedford boys that you mentioned in Bedford, Virginia, of course, there's drawbacks to that. If you have a particular bad day in a battlefield, you could have no more young men in a certain town if they're all recruited from a locale. I would commend that book to you if you're interested in how units, Civil War era, and this is mostly about Southern units, but the same applies to the North for the most part, of recruiting from a locale really increases cohesiveness because, if you are brave in battle, you can go home and be proud of your service. And if you're cowardly in battle, you have to go home and live the rest of your life. Everyone's going to know, hey, that's the guy that ran away at Chickamauga. I guess, I don't know if you ran across Parson Brownlow. Parson Brownlow was an East Tennessee, I believe he was a Methodist, but he was a particularly bloodthirsty Methodist and actually advocated mass slaughter of all of his neighbors during and immediately after the war. what I found in other locales is, people on secession, for example, didn't vote statewide. Each individual voted at his polling station. So it seems like the tendency to browbeat people into voting a certain way would be based on the locality, not the state, because no individual voted in the entire state of Tennessee. Every individual Tennessean voted at his individual polling place. And if there's a big crowd of pro-Union people there or pro-Confederate people there, you're more likely to have intimidation. Did you observe that?
I did. I saw that a lot in both newspaper articles and several journals that I read through, women specifically who would talk about their brothers and their dads going to the polling station, and some of them very loudly saying, I will vote pro-Union, and then others who they knew were pro-Union who ended up voting Confederate, or secession, sorry. So I think that is information, and I think it really leads to not accurate vote tallies for those counties, especially the ones that had higher levels of slave owners per capita. I think that those are the areas where you ended up having other people vote for secession who didn't necessarily support it overall. But also, weren't those the same individuals who, even though they didn't support secession, also end up serving in the Confederate military? I don't know, but I have a feeling that would be some connection there as well.
Yeah, if you look at, there's a unit that was formed out of East Tennessee counties, a Confederate unit named by John Vaughn. He was the brigade commander. His brigade consisted entirely of companies that were formed well after Confederate conscription. So they were formed in August of '62 out of East Tennessee units, and they were obviously the most motivated pro-Confederates would enlist in April of '61, or May or June in Tennessee's case. But by August of '62, the people that are still left are the kind of the reluctant Confederates to say, well, I guess I better join some unit before I get shamed into being scared.
Or killed, being assumed that you were a Union supporter, especially in eastern Tennessee, having the bands going around and killing people. That is actually how Uriah York died, was that he was chased down and killed because of his Union service. So
right.
I think that you're correct in thinking that those later recruits were more on the fence.
Yeah, and Vaughn's brigade did not exactly distinguish itself with great bravery. It wasn't the best unit in the Confederate Army because I'm not sure how motivated those guys were. I'm trying to think. Was there another question I had about the war? It escapes me now. Anyway, did you? I think I seem to remember you mentioned Parson Brownlow at some point. Is that correct?
I know that he came up in my research, but I don't know that I don't believe that I directly included him in the thesis, no.
Okay. I thought maybe you had. Maybe I'm just imagining things. But anyway, he was a particularly bloodthirsty Unionist that was advocating the genocide of Southerners after the war as a Methodist minister.
I think he might have come up in the research of another person who was doing the thesis work during the same track that I was, another lady who was in the program. So
okay, maybe that's it. Okay, well, I thoroughly enjoyed the thesis. It was fun to read, and I'm glad to see you make it. My biggest comments were just on the formatting, and I think that has to do with using Google Docs and.
Yeah, it's easier to send around to people, but I do have it on my computer in an actual Word document to get all the corrections in there. So it is much better on my computer, but
okay.
I am sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, but it was very interesting. I like the work you did with statistical analysis of voting behaviors and whatnot. And being a soldier who was from Appalachia myself, and it sort of rung true for me. There was a number of reasons why I chose the career path that I did. But I was born in Roanoke, Virginia, but my parents were both from West Virginia, southern West Virginia. So I have connections to the area as well. So thank you for a great thesis.
Another reason why this was important to me is because I actually have a cousin from the Greenbrier area, and he was adopted from Korea, but he had great economic opportunities. His parents are very wealthy. He had wonderful educational opportunities. He went to WVU. He had full ride, all of that stuff. And what was the third? Education, employment, and economics. Education, employment, yeah, economics. So all of those were good for him. So why did he decide to go off and be a Marine? He didn't have to do that. And it was to draw a connection to his adopted family heritage, and also to continue on within a community where he had felt mentally isolated because of his adoption, and he created his own new community within the Marines. And it was interesting to talk to him and talk through this with him and just kind of see that connection, which is even present today as to why some enter the military. So it was very interesting. Thank you.
Well, Joe, that's all I had, the comments or questions I had.
All right, thank you. Dr. Roberts, do you have anything? Or Herbert?
I want to ask one quick question, and this is somewhat hypothetical, but that's okay. Now that you've done all this hard work, we can ask hypothetical questions.
Yes.
Let me get my video here to go in, and again, we do have folks. I do have some folks in the room. So, Amber, would Americans have supported World War I and World War II without the lost cause of the Civil War?
World War I would say no. I think that they were ready to not be involved. I am even now still sometimes surprised that they did become involved. It's not surprising that they waited until so late, but I'm not sure that they would have gone into World War I. There seemed to be a lot of hesitancy, and the soldiers that I looked at were not enthusiastic. Whereas in World War II, when I listened to the oral histories after Pearl Harbor, you see a lot more enthusiasm, because I do draw that connection. Just like the Civil War was attacking their homeland, literally within their county, during World War II, you again have your homeland attacked. Although it's not locationally the same, I think the nationalism was to such a point where they were patriotic enough to say, hey, we have been attacked, and they took it in a personal way and made that emotional connection. And I think that Sergeant York stands out in World War I because he had created this new community around him, and it was a response to protect his community to act in such a way during World War I.
Yeah, I think you've got something to work with here, Amber. I think there's some areas you can take this and extend it, do some more research, widen your scope of your arguments and your focus. I do hope you're going to consider our PhD program once it formally launches. It's got to go through an accreditation review cycle, but we're hoping to get this thing going soon. That's the only thing I really have to say. It's been great working with you. I'm actually being called away to another meeting. So, Dr. Super, does anyone have any questions on where to go from here logistically before I concede?
I have a lot of questions, but I can just email you. And my questions, they're not bad. I just need the steps. I mean, I'll just email you.
Yeah, well, I can actually tell you very quickly what happens. Whatever additional revisions y'all want Amber to make, you need to make sure that she knows what those are. That assumes that the two of you agree that she has passed the defense. And you can do that offline. Amber can go, whatever, how y'all want to do this. Assuming she has passed the defense, then you will need to provide her a list of the revisions to make. Then, Amber, you are to make those before you submit the thesis to the library. And we all appreciate, once you've made the revisions, you circle back around to these two fellows. Really work through Dr. Super, your director, just so he can run through the thesis very quickly to make sure that all the things that they wanted changed are changed. Then you submit it to the Jerry Falwell Library Scholarly Crossings office. That office will send you an email once everything is finalized, and you'll need to provide that email to Dr. Super. They may have some questions about formatting. As Dr. White mentioned, there could be some formatting matters that they will have you do, Amber. You okay with that? You understand that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, only then is the degree posted. So you will get a grade, assuming you pass the defense. Dr. Super will be posting a grade within the next 24 hours. And then, but that does not mean you have earned the degree. You don't earn the degree until the thesis is posted in Scholarly Cross.
Okay. So
All right. Y'all have any questions about all of that?
So I do the edits, the revisions, send it back to Dr. Super for a final look over, and then I send it on to the library.
That is correct. And then they look at it. They may tell you to do a thing or two, but they will send you a super formal email, and that email needs to come back to Dr. Super.
Okay.
All right? And then Dr. White and Dr. Super, there's some things on the back side of this that has nothing to do with Amber, and I'll just email y'all quickly to let you know what is required on that side, okay? Okay. May I don't know if I have to ask permission to secede, but anything else for me?
You joined of your own free will.
Okay, thank you. All right, folks, have a Merry Christmas. And gentlemen, I believe I will see you tomorrow for another defense.
No, that's today.
Oh, okay, I'll see you later today, gentlemen. Thank you. All right, bye-bye. Okay, Herbert. Leave me.
Well, so before Dr. White, before John and I talk, Amber, I just want to say you did do an excellent job with the research. There's a lot of material there that you plowed through, and I won't speak for him about the Civil War literature, but you did handle the Appalachian stuff very well. A lot of that stuff is just a bunch of mumbo jumbo, personally.
Yeah.
I've dealt with it for a long time, and there's a lot of it that's can be difficult to get through because a lot of it is not as straightforward as some of the Civil War stuff in terms of why people are fighting or why people are seceding or why people are staying. But you did handle that very well. And I know you did work very hard on this, and you put a lot of time and effort into it, and I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for sticking with the program and seeing it through. So I don't know how, I don't want to disband the meeting yet, but I would like to talk with John privately, briefly. So however you can mute it so you can't hear us.
Oh, okay.
But we can hear each other. I'm not sure how that works exactly. Because when I muted it, I could hear everybody else.
I think I might have to exit the... Can you hear me? Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, still can hear you. You weren't talking. Okay, let me try again.
Amber, I think you're going to have to exit and then rejoin once we're done.
I think
To
that's...
give
Yeah, you might. She might have to, or leave the room or something. I don't know. Or disconnect her headphones.
Or